March 6th, 2025, Norwalk, Connecticut. Throughout New England's long and historic past, gruesome tales of murder and unsolved mysteries have found themselves frequently in the history books. The Smuttynose Murders, the New Bedford Highway Killer, and the Connecticut Valley Killer, just to name a few, and the countless other mysteries of people vanishing into the woods of New England to never be seen or heard from again. In 2025, the internet would be lit ablaze with rumors spreading of a serial killer, one operating within New England claiming numerous victims within rapid succession. 13 bodies within a 70-mile radius, all discovered within the previous months, with the possibility of more bodies being discovered. Could it be a possibility that the rumors are true, and that there is a new serial killer prowling New England? Or is it possible these are all separate murders or suspicious deaths? Could murders from previous years also be connected to this current string of mysterious deaths? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, a dive into a true crime story occurring in real time, with the victim count seemingly climbing. Is there any truth to the story, or is this just a massive, unrelated coincidence? Today, we explore the 2025 New England serial killer. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and if you were checking out this show on YouTube first, I want to say I appreciate you so much for checking out the channel, checking out my content, and like I said, it goes without saying how much I appreciate you for tuning in and listening today. But if you are listening on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out within the algorithm, and I greatly appreciate it. If you have found me on Spotify, please turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I post a new video as well. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at the same handle, Unblurring the Unknown. You can find more content from me there. And also feel free to send me topic suggestions. I'm always doing those. Those can go to my email, which is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com, or Instagram direct message. Now, on today's episode, we have a topic that has gripped the news now for pretty much the past month, or even 2 months. And it is one that has seemingly taken the true crime world ablaze. And that is this idea that within the southeastern portion of New England has found itself within the grasp of a serial killer. Now, whether or not you believe that, is kind of all up to you. However, we will dive into all the facts that we have currently and lay it all out there about what we know and what we don't regarding this ever-changing case and what is currently going on within some of these investigations into the bodies discovered all throughout New England. We will also explore the possibility if there could be connections between these current discoveries in 2025 and previous discoveries of bodies dating all the way back to 2016 and continuing all the way through 2021, and seeing perhaps if there could be some connections between any of these deaths, these homicides, these mysterious deaths, whatever they are, if there's any connection between them. Now, I will try my absolute best, and even though I might be the farthest thing from a criminal justice expert, I want to provide all the facts I have, all the details I have, but also stay away from speculative theories and things of the like. And since this is an active case, information may change by the time this episode comes out, or by the time you listen to it. So at the time of this episode being published, this will be the most current versions of all of these cases up to this point. So with that being said, I'm first going to dive into the string of deaths that we have within this kind of zeitgeist that started this whole New England serial killer conspiracy. What we know currently about these deaths and the victims, and then kind of explore this current fallout and happenings online regarding this case. And then, like I mentioned, I want to share a similar string of strange deaths that happened just a few years ago, and again, kind of compare and contrast a little bit, and then at the very end, discuss some theories about whether or not a serial killer could truly be at work here, or maybe if this is all just coincidence that these bodies have been discovered in such quick succession. But with that being said, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of the episode. Our story begins, in the most part, back on March 6th of this year in the town of Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, according to some people out there in the plethora of Facebook groups and Reddit forums that have emerged from the woodwork as this case has kind of developed over time since March 6th, it seems that this is kind of the kickoff of this event. Again, others have tried to connect other mysterious deaths or homicides predating March 6th, but from what I could find, a majority of sources out there state March 6th as kind of being the beginning of this kind of phenomenon, if you will. Now, for a majority of those Facebook groups, Reddit forums, whatever you may have you, a lot of the information that they are going over is speculatory. They're grasping at straws, they're grasping at eggshells into kind of theories and when this whole thing starts. So again, I'm going to approach this with as conservative as a mindset as possible about what could be going on here, rather than just jumping the gun and saying flat out this is a serial killer. But let's go back here a little bit. Let's start on March 6th again. On March 6th, Norwalk police, in conjunction with Wilton, Connecticut police, would discover the body of 35-year-old Paige Fannin from West Islip, New York. She would be declared missing 2 days prior, on March 4th, and last seen the following day, March 5th, in Wilton, Connecticut, near Schneck's Island, around noon. It was during this missing persons search when the Norwalk police would discover clothing around the banks of the Norwalk River, and shortly after discovering the clothes, they would discover the body of Paige Fannin. Now, from what is available to the public and what I could find, the cause of death has not been revealed. However, in my research, I did find some media reports that stated that Paige had struggled with her mental health in the past. However, whether or not that contributed to her death remains unclear. Now, also on March 6th, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, off of Route 3 in a wooded area, a person was in the woods looking for shed deer antlers when they stumbled upon a human skull. It was clear that the skull had been there for quite some time. However, it is unclear whether or not more remains have been found in that spot since the initial discovery of this human skull in Plymouth, Massachusetts on March 6th. Now, fast forward almost 2 weeks later, on March 19th, in Groton, Connecticut, a passerby of the Colonel Ledyard Cemetery in Groton, and I've heard it Groton or Groton, I think it's Groton. I know I'm from New England, but I don't frequent Connecticut very much, so I think it's Groton, and I'm going to run with that, and if I do pronounce that wrong, please feel free to correct me. I try to get it right as much as possible. However, a passerby of the Colonel Ledyard Cemetery in Groton would call the police over a suspicious-looking wheeled black suitcase or briefcase of some sort at the entrance to the cemetery, and that a foul odor was coming from it. When police arrived and investigated, inside of the suitcase was the dismembered torso of a woman who would be identified as 58-year-old Suzanne Wormser. Now, as it turns out, this case in particular has seen a plethora of updates shortly after being grouped in with this first initial series of killings. Now, it is theorized by police that a roommate of Suzanne's, named Donald Koffel, 68 years old, confessed to the killing and was charged with murder. He would confess to killing her by hitting her in the head with a baseball bat repeatedly before dismembering her body. Koffel would never make it to his court hearing, as he would pass away in prison on May 9th, 2025, due to pancreatic cancer. Now, some have speculated how a man sick with cancer could have been able to pull off the feat of killing Suzanne. However, I will save that speculation for now. This case was, again, now once attributed to this serial killer, but now current updates have kind of seen itself taken off of the list. Now, the next death in this timeline would be on March 20th, when the body of 59-year-old Denise Leary would be discovered in New Haven, Connecticut, in a residential neighborhood. A section of forested area was being cleared, and that is when her remains would be discovered by a group of brush clearers. Denise Leary was missing since last September, and the details around her death have not been fully released to the public. Less than a week later, March 26th, this time in Foster, Rhode Island, a driver would pull off the side of the highway and they would discover human remains off of the highway. Police would be called and it would be discovered that the remains that were found on the side of the highway belonged to 56-year-old Michelle Romano of Warwick, Rhode Island. Michelle had been missing since last August, and while her case and cause of death also remains unknown, her family has come out on social media and through media outlets saying that Michelle was not the victim of a serial killer and to leave her out of this broader conversation of the possibility of a serial killer being out there in New England. Now, I respect that entirely. However, for the sake of the episode and the information we currently have, I of course have to include her in this timeline of deaths. Now, this next person I found was not necessarily a victim of the serial killer, as one source I found did mention this as somebody who kind of went missing within this general area and within this same time period. Not a lot of mainstream outlets reported this, but I did happen to find it, and I felt like I wanted to include it as well. And this is actually a missing persons case. We have not found this individual, to my knowledge, up to this point. But again, by any time that you were listening to this episode, there could be updates that I have not found yet. Now, Stephen Gush would go missing on March 29th while going on a hike somewhere between Groton, Connecticut, and Mystic, Connecticut. Now, this idea that perhaps Stephen had been a victim of this supposed serial killer would be through a sighting made by a hiker at Bluff Point State Park, only a 10-minute drive from where Stephen was last seen the day he went missing. Now, this account, which was documented on Facebook and then shared, talked about a man's run-in with a strange man following him on the hiking trail. When turning to confront this strange man following this hiker, he reportedly, being the strange man, took out a switchblade knife and threatened the hiker. Now, the hiker fled from the woods and reported this encounter to police. Now, this, of course, might be a stretch to put two and two together with a possible serial killer, but it is another unaccounted for person in this seemingly never-ending number of bodies and now disappearances that you want to include. Then on April 9th in Killingly, Connecticut, only 10 miles from Foster, Rhode Island, human remains were discovered in a wooded area. Now, the details on this case are extremely limited, but what we do know is that police estimated the victim's height as roughly 5 foot 8 inches tall and between the ages of 25 to 45, and that they could have died this year or back in 2024. Now, of course, that is incredibly broad and incredibly vague, but until we have more details, this is unfortunately all that we know. Then, the next day, April 10th, this time in Framingham, Massachusetts, firefighters extinguishing a brush fire off of the highway turnpike would stumble upon human remains. The body is believed to have been there for several months, but other than that, this is the extent of what we know about the case. However, while doing my research, it turns out that on March 5th, one day before the discovery of Paige Fannon's body in Norwalk, Connecticut, another body would be found in Framingham, Massachusetts, near Old Connecticut Path in Framingham. Now, this in itself would be a mildly wooded area with a field and some power lines running through it, and that's where the body would be discovered. No other details have been provided on that case, and as of this episode's publishing, I was not able to find an identity of that body or a cause of death. However, that is two bodies discovered in Framingham, Massachusetts, within roughly a month and change. Then on April 22nd, another body, this time in Springfield, Massachusetts. At around 8 a.m. on the 22nd, a woman would be found barely alive next to a bike path in Springfield, Mass. She would pass away and then be identified as 45-year-old Megan Meredith. Now, this has been declared a homicide investigation. This is actually the first mysterious, death up to this point that has been officially declared a homicide investigation. And when asked to speak on the rumors of a serial killer operating within New England, Hampton District Attorney Anthony Gallooni said, and I quote, "I'm always a proponent of people being aware of their surroundings, no matter where you live or where you are. But with the recent incidents into the recent murder this week and anything else, I'm not in a position to say. There's no reason to believe there's a need for any heightened concern for safety measures in this region." Gallooni continued and said that there is no connection or evidence that points to a connection with the homicide of Megan Meredith and the other deaths seen around New England in recent months. Now, the next death that would take place would be on April 25th in Taunton, Massachusetts, where the body of 51-year-old Samuel Stovall would be discovered in the river near Taunton. Now, Stovall seems to be a death that is sometimes included within this timeline, but perhaps is the most disconnected from this case. Now, only some sources I found mentioned his name. Some did, some did not. However, it is a death that takes place within this time frame, so I wanted to include it. Now, while Stovall's cause of death seemingly has not been released to the public, his death has been deemed not suspicious, and police feel that no foul play was involved. Now, Stovall, as it turns out, was homeless and a registered sex offender. And it is because of these reasons I feel like maybe Stovall was not the victim of a serial killer. Now, up to this point, the victims have been women, with the exception of these unidentified human remains up to this point, and there are a lot of possibilities what this could have been with Stovall's death, and perhaps the most likely one being that he was under the influence of something and fell into the river. Of course, that is just speculation. However, Stovall, in my opinion, is off the list in terms of possible serial killer victims, if you want to believe that theory. Now, the next death I want to talk about is on April 27th in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. 72-year-old Mary Colasanto would also be pulled from a river. Now, Mary Colasanto had been missing for roughly about a month before her body was discovered in the river. Now, she seems like she could have fallen into the river, and this is the theory that police at this time have, and like as the most possible outcome. However, the cause of death fully remains unclear. Then, May 14th, Westerly, Rhode Island. A human leg bone would be discovered in the Watch Hill neighborhood of the affluent area of Westerly. Now, originally I had found a source saying that the body was found on land. And then other sites kind of contradicted this and said that the remains had actually washed on shore. Also, once I started my research, this body had been identified, and now as I did my research and as I kind of assembled my talking points for this episode, I had actually figured out that they had identified this body, or this leg bone that was a part of this body, in Westerly, Rhode Island, and the body was discovered or identified as 31-year-old Eric Ween, who had been reported missing on April 18th. Now, his car was found in South Kingston, Rhode Island on April 10th, and had been reported missing on April 18th, of course. Now, his car that was found would be towed away because it was parked illegally. Now, the police say that no foul play is suspected in the death of Eric Ween. However, I do find that odd. Now, I don't know any circumstances where someone would disappear and then reappear washed up on the beach other than some boating accident gone awry, but I do find this fishy. But obviously, the police know more than I do when it comes to this incident. Now, as we start to kind of catch up to current times, May 30th, in New Haven, Connecticut again. This time it would be 34-year-old Jasmine Wilkes, who her body would be found in Edgewood Park in New Haven, and as the police would go on to quote that her body had no apparent signs of trauma found. Now, much like the other cases, police are still investigating Jasmine Wilkes' cause of death. Whether or not this is deemed foul play remains a mystery, of course, but the police are saying that there was no apparent signs of trauma. That kind of points to the direction that this is probably not foul play. Now, on June 1st, in Milton, Massachusetts, the body of 21-year-old Adriana Suazo would be discovered, and she would also be discovered with no visible signs of trauma on her body, and she would be discovered in the woods in Milton. Now, even though there seems to be no signs of trauma, her family finds her death incredibly suspicious, and they are convinced that she was with someone when she died or shortly leading up to her death, and this is what her family had mentioned in an interview done by the New York Post. Now, up to this episode's publishing, this would be the last death found that has been affiliated with this so-called New England serial killer. Now, because of these deaths, it has sent the internet and media into a frenzy, with claims of there being this killer out on the loose. However, there is very little information to connect any of these cases. A majority of them are women, yes, but cause of death for all these victims has not been determined, and some of them seem like they were more accidental deaths versus homicides. However, this did not deter the internet from entering a phase of wild speculation. Facebook groups emerged with thousands of members, and they all began speculating who the serial killer could be. The Facebook group seemed to be taking this way too far and way out of touch, if you ask my opinion. People would be going onto these Facebook groups pretending that they were even the serial killer, which is absolutely absurd to me. But again, I guess nothing about human nature surprises me anymore. Now, one user in one of these Facebook groups will go onto this group and claim that they were the serial killer by posting this mysterious haiku of sorts under an anonymous handle, saying that they buried 6 bodies on Scarborough Beach in Narragansett, Rhode Island. Now, of course, Narragansett police would kind of catch wind of this anonymous poster on this Facebook group claiming that they had buried 6 bodies on Scarborough Beach, and they would go and investigate. Now, of course, when Narragansett police would arrive to Scarborough Beach, they would investigate, they would dig up the beach, they would bring cadaver dogs, and they would find, shocker, no bodies underneath the beach at Scarborough Beach. Now, you have others as well in this Facebook group claiming that someone reached out to them and confessed to be the killer with no additional information beyond that, and others going with wild speculative theories that this was a result of a husband-wife duo committing the crimes. Of course, there is absolutely zero evidence to support this idea. Again, up to this point, we have these series of unexplainable deaths, all within a couple 100-mile radius, definitely within this kind of 70-mile circle, as people say, and a majority of them we don't have answers on quite yet. We don't have methods of death, we don't have a consistent victim profile, we have women, we have men, we have white, black, nothing is consistent here. And of course, any of you who have done any research into serial killers or follow true crime, you know that a large majority of the time, serial killers kill based off an MO, or a consistent pattern. And up to this point, we don't have that. A lot of these killings don't seem like homicides, and if they were, the manner of death has not been released. Up to this point, these quote-unquote killings are inconsistent in profile and seem virtually impossible to group together as a product of one deranged killer. Now, the only serial killer that I can think of that killed without an apparent MO would be Israel Keys, and if you do not know who that is, he'll most likely be a topic of an episode sometime down the road. However, don't take my personal opinions as fact, as that's merely kind of how I feel. Of course, we do have probably some of these that will be deemed to be homicides, but the idea of the internet going and linking all of these deaths together, the ones that still remain kind of unsolved, as one person, just seems like a huge, huge stretch. And I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that the internet, and specifically these Facebook groups, have taken this to a point where it's kind of almost uncomfortable, and all they're doing is they're not really helping. They're just kind of stirring the pot and throwing out theories with no evidence to back any of them up. However, as it stands right now, I don't think these deaths are the work of a serial killer. They seem very random in the nature of death, and the fact that we don't have all the information makes me very hesitant to just widely jump to conclusions. Now, I know that the internet has done that, but I am not going to do it. But hearing the news of all these serial killers got me thinking about something that happened in the news a few years ago, and I remember actually hearing about it, and it kind of popped into my head when I was researching this whole new serial killer phenomenon that's going on in New England. Now, again, as anybody who's listened to the show for a very long time, and as I just recently mentioned, I live in northern New England, and I vividly remember when there was another set of serial killer rumors that started circling around when bodies were being discovered in and around the Merrimack River in the southern part of New Hampshire. However, that is not just where the bodies show up, and as I dug into this a little bit more, there seems to be, more than I thought, of course, to be a plethora of bodies discovered throughout southern New Hampshire and Massachusetts between 2016 through about 2021 time period. Now, of course, I don't have the, time to dive into kind of all of these suspicious deaths kind of one by one, but I want to give you kind of at least a little bit of a breakdown, give you kind of a little timeline, too, because I think it's important. And I do find this set of deaths from 2016 to 2021 very strange, and of course, this would be kind of the first time these rumors of a new serial killer in New England kind of would have started. Of course, anybody who has done research into serial killers has kind of found themselves that there has been a lot within New England. It seems to be, it's arguably one of the oldest places in the history of the United States. So obviously there is a lot of history when it comes to serial killers, unsolved murders, disappearances, things of that nature. But I want to go into this kind of a short little synopsis, a timeline of these deaths in 2016 to 2021 that kind of kicked off this first set of serial killer rumors. Even though that never got as big as what's going on currently, I still feel like it's worth sharing. Now, there are a lot of these cases that we don't even have the names released for the victims, even years after the fact, or years after that I could find. And I'm going to kind of go maybe a little rapid fire here with the information, kind of throw it right at you in terms of what we do know at this time and the timeline that we have, or at least a rough timeline that we have for this first set of deaths that started back in 2016. Now, before I dive into this, the information trying to find these deaths between 2016 to 2021 was insanely challenging because a lot of the information that was out there was oversaturated with what was going on currently, so I kind of had to really dig back in the archives to try and find like little timelines or things like that so that I could kind of piece this together for you. Again, like I mentioned, I vividly remembered this going on, so I was trying to kind of plug in keywords on the internet to try and figure out if I could find articles, and a lot of what it was is me having to go through 2-3 separate links to find news articles about these kind of bodies dating back to 2016. But with that being said, like I mentioned, information was really hard to find, but let me give you this little timeline. And again, it's going to be kind of rapid fire, so I apologize if it kind of comes out quick and kind of hits you right in your ears, but let's get into it. On December 30th, 2016, a man's body would be found in the Merrimack River in Amesbury, Massachusetts. Then on June 30th, 2017, another man's body would be found in the Merrimack River, this time in Lowell, Massachusetts. July 20th, 2018, a woman's body would also be found in the Merrimack River, this time in Lawrence, Massachusetts. May 7th, 2019, Nicole Davis would be camping with friends when she would go for a walk and not be seen again. Her body would be discovered in the Lamprey River. Now, police believe her cause of death to be drowning and that it was accidental in nature. August 13th, 2019, 49-year-old Michael Edwards would be found dead in the Mascoma River in Lebanon, New Hampshire. Edwards was homeless and was believed to have drowned. Toxicology reports I was not able to find. September 16th, 2019, Jeffrey St. Laurent was found dead on the Maine, New Hampshire border in the Piscataqua River. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, and police believe this to be a suicide. October 25th, 2019, another woman's body would be found dead in the Merrimack River in Lowell, Massachusetts. January 17th, 2020, Susan Willand would be found dead in the Merrimack River in Lowell, Massachusetts. The cause of her death is also believed to be drowning, and no foul play is believed to be involved. Now, she was missing for a month before she was found in the river, and according to sources, her boyfriend had recently suffered a stroke, and she was providing for him round the clock, and it actually took a mental toll on her. June 26, 2020, a woman's body would be found on the banks of the Merrimack River in Manchester, New Hampshire. July 8th, 2020, a body would be discovered from Horseshoe Pond in Concord, New Hampshire, and he, of course, would be passed away. Judging by the very little information I could find about this case in particular, I actually searched Reddit, which kind of also helped me with this timeline, to be honest. One user on Reddit claimed that the body discovered at Horseshoe Pond was actually a family relative of theirs, and that the case is believed to be a homicide, and that the New Hampshire police are suspiciously radio silent on the case, and that they are still waiting for answers as to what happened. August 30th, 2020, a body would be found in the Gosh, I can't even pronounce some of the things, and I'm from New England. That's how much I struggle up here. You should see all the names of the rivers in the areas. I struggle with pronouncing things, and I've lived up here my whole life. A body would be found in the Contoocook, I got at that time, River in Henniker, New Hampshire. Now, I could not find any other additional information on this case. Also, on August 30th, 2020, Kimberly Blanchard went missing and her body was found in a wooded area in Rochester, New Hampshire. I could not find any more updates out there into her cause of death. September 23rd, 2020, a body would be found in Hooksett, New Hampshire, of a 52-year-old man who would be found in the Merrimack River as well, and this death would also be ruled as suicide, and I could not find out this man's identity through any of the sources that I was able to find. On October 16th, 2020, Timothy Fraher, her body would be found in the woods behind an apartment building in Concord, New Hampshire. No cause of death has been determined at this time, and it seems to be mostly radio silent, like some of these other cases I just listed from the New Hampshire State Police, or at least what we have available to the public. Now, this one in particular seems very suspicious to me, given where her body was found, but we have little to no information on any of these cases, so to me, they kind of all seem a little bit suspicious. Then, December 10th, 2020, human remains would be found in the woods in Ossipee, New Hampshire, and they would be found in a heavily wooded and mountainous area, so it could be possible that this was a hiking accident or someone who succumbed to the winter elements while kind of out in the woods. Now, no information about that person's identity has been released by what I could find. And then on December 30th, 2020, the body of Cynthia Halloran would be found near a walking trail in Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, according to a nh.gov press release, her cause of death is deemed as undetermined, which is incredibly vague. Then, January 6th, 2021, a man's body would be found in the woods behind a Concord apartment building less than a half a mile away from where Tiffany Fraher's body would be found. March 11th, 2021, a 80-year-old Portsmouth man would be found in the river in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, near Four Tree Island on the Piscataqua River. Now, the police in this case do not expect foul play. March 12th, 2021, Maggie Barrero would go missing in Lincoln, New Hampshire, and after a week later, her body would be discovered in the Pemigewasset River. Now, there is no updates at this time from New Hampshire State Police on her particular case. However, her family believes it to be foul play, and judging by the New Hampshire State Police and a quote that they gave to, I guess, the family, this kind of source I found was kind of vague on this. The New Hampshire State Police stated, and I quote, "We cannot respond to that in order to compromise the integrity of the investigation when asked by media sources." Now, this makes me think that, and more particular, the family of Maggie Barrero, makes them also believe that the New Hampshire Police thinks that there was foul play involved. However, again, suspiciously silent in terms of what happened here. Then, March 17th, 2021, a Rochester, New Hampshire man named James Martin would be found dead near Salem Falls River in Berwick, Maine, and his body would be discovered in the woods. Now, on March 17th, 2021, another body would be found in the Merrimack River in Bow, New Hampshire. March 21st, 2021, Greg Serby, whose body would also be found in the Merrimack River, this time in actually Tingsboro, Massachusetts, would be found a few days after he went missing. Like many of these other cases, and pretty much a majority of them, foul play is not suspected. March 27th, 2021, Sinead Lyons from Massachusetts was found a few weeks after she went missing, apparently drowned while with her German Shepherd in Lincoln, New Hampshire. And it is widely believed that Sinead Lyons believed to have fallen through the ice while walking her dog on Ossipee Lake. Now, April 23rd, 2021, human remains would be found on the same walking trail that Cynthia Halloran's body would be found in December of the previous year in Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, of course, there are deaths kind of in and around the Merrimack River and southern New Hampshire in general that seem strange and rather unexplained. Now, of course, you do have a large collection of these cases that I just mentioned that were either suicides or seemed like they were kind of just straight up accidents, or so, according to the New Hampshire police. Now, I am going to go on a little bit of a tirade here, and if you don't want to hear me do this, I completely understand. And it is no secret that the New Hampshire police have faced a fair amount of scrutiny for their handling of potential homicides and other deaths, even dating back all the way to the disappearance of Maura Murray back in 2004. Now, the New Hampshire police are not great. They are possibly even worse than okay when it comes to this kind of thing, and people are overall not happy, and have even called them grossly incompetent at times, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole I could go down. Users on Reddit, which helped me for some of this research and some of this discussion for the episode, have criticized the New Hampshire police, the New Hampshire State Police. They've criticized them immensely and have commented that they feel like a majority of these deaths are often forgotten about and merely filed away somewhere and never touched again, and that it is much easier to explain it as some type of freak accident without investigating the possibility of foul play. Now, others have theorized that instead, a lot of these uninvestigated deaths are those of homeless men and women, or those who had been known to have some type of issue with drugs or narcotics of some sort, meaning the lack of investigation was done intentionally. Now, if you want to believe this would entail that due to the victim's background and rather frowned upon things, the police merely didn't look into it as hard. Now, of course, I am not saying that this is the case for all of these cases I listed from 2016 to 2021, but it is an interesting point to make, and I definitely don't think that this would be the first instance that this has happened in any police force across the country. However, I digress. That's kind of my little rant about the New Hampshire police departments. Of course, there's other police departments, like I just mentioned, that have dropped the ball immensely when it comes to missing people and unsolved homicides and things of that nature. Every kind of law enforcement, again, department in some way has probably dropped the ball on a case, and it probably eats at a majority of them. However, I cannot sit here and acknowledge the fact that you have people on the internet who I'm going to kind of go out on a limb and believe, where their cases have seemingly been ignored or unsolved, or for reasons unknown, the police departments have just been radio silent, and to me, that's no excuse. However, again, I digress. Let's go back to our serial killer conversation. Does this stretch of deaths from 2016 to 2021 mean that there could be a serial killer in southern New Hampshire back during this time period? Now, even though we have this second string of deaths, some of which seem very homicide-like in nature, it still seems incredibly unlikely. However, it is no secret that the Merrimack River is very dangerous and possesses some of the most dangerous currents of any river in New England. The Merrimack River connects to the Atlantic Ocean, and the closer you get to the ocean, the currents can rapidly intensify. Coupled with unpredictable drop-offs and the fact that many people participate in water activities such as boating and fishing on the river, it is very easy to see that how an accident can turn tragic with relative ease. Now, the river runs between the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, so it attracts a heavy amount of people because of this. People trying to beat the summer heat don't fully understand how the river works and how dangerous they can be, especially if you do not have a life jacket or if you are by yourself and you don't have anyone else with you. Of course, the river itself does not account for all of these deaths. However, water deaths in New Hampshire are not uncommon either. Accidents happen, and to attribute many of these that either seem intentional, like suicide or accidents, to some type of serial killer seems kind of a stretch and seems unlikely. Now, in my own opinion, I do think that, I guess, back myself up. I know that New Hampshire and the state of New England itself has had a long history of serial killers, but I do not think one is going on here. Now, that does not negate the fact that homicides do happen, but the chances of these deaths or homicides being connected with other unfortunate deaths across state lines seems very unlikely. However, like I just previously mentioned, the New Hampshire State Police and local departments aren't out of the woods here. Regardless of there being a serial killer or not, their track record is not good at all. And I am not sitting here telling you, again, that everyone is a bad cop because of this, because of course that's not the case. However, what I am saying is that in certain cases, and even some of the cases I listed to you, you have family members waiting for answers about what happened to their loved ones. And based off of what I could find on the internet, they are left waiting and waiting and waiting because the state police has either dragged its feet or showed a collective effort to not care about some of these victims. Now, again, I am not saying that is the case for all of them, but it is significant, and I believe it should be discussed. Again, I don't interpret these comments as inflammatory in any way. I guess this is me just voicing my own personal opinion after all of the information I read about this string of deaths and people kind of commenting that they're waiting to hear back from investigators and so on and so forth. However, with all of this being talked about, the string of deaths between New Hampshire and Massachusetts between 2016 and 2021, in my opinion, are not related. You have genuine crimes committed here, but most seem accidental and not connected. However, when it comes to the current debate about the serial killer in New England theory sweeping the internet, let's discuss theories. Now, the first theory here was that there would, of course, be a serial killer, and that there is a serial killer of some sort out there currently now in 2025, and the police are not talking about it as to not alarm the public. Now, this could be the case. However, to me, there just isn't anything connecting these deaths at all. We have kind of a whole assortment of different deaths here, or I guess types of deaths from what I can see, and pretty much I guess, let me reword myself here. You have a lot of different deaths where you have no idea what is the cause of death, and they have not been released for a majority of these cases, and it seems like the MO is not consistent. You have men, women, age differences, race differences between the victims. Nothing seems to fit, and the manner in which their bodies were discovered also makes us, and me, ask some questions. Now, of course, there is a chance, that some of these cases are in fact homicides, like I've mentioned before in this episode, but it seems like they are more unrelated than anything else. You have bodies being discovered kind of through happenstance, like firefighters finding one during a brush fire, or a group of brush clearers finding a body in the woods. And then you also have, kind of coupled in, the weather is getting nicer. People are starting to move around a little bit more. And New England is a very touristy area. You have people going out in the woods and exploring and doing things like that. It's post-winter, meaning anyone who might have passed away during the winter, now their bodies would be easier to find, and they're now exposed out into the open because warmer weather has melted away all this snow. You have a whole bunch of different factors that are playing into each other here, and the idea that all of these killings are done by one person, just to me, doesn't make much sense at all. Now, the second theory I want to dive into is aptly titled Different Killers. Now, this theory has been thrown around quite a bit, mostly through these serial killer Facebook groups, that this could be a husband-wife team, which, like I mentioned before in the early portions of this episode, there was absolutely no evidence to support this claim whatsoever, and I don't like this theory either. Again, all evidence regarding a serial killer in this case is only speculatory. There is no MO, no consistent victim profile, and some of these deaths seem very accidental in nature. Any theories proposed by these fanatical Facebook internet theorists who speculate on the nature of these killings with disregard, they kind of almost hinder these investigations more than helping, especially when false leads are created and police are then sent on wild goose chases. Now, another theory I want to talk about, and I guess this is kind of the big one that I've kind of already talked about, and it is titled No Killer, Just Coincidence. Now, I honestly believe this is a big part of this case in that these bodies just happen to be discovered in quick succession, mostly out of sheer luck. Some of these bodies were more than likely the result of homicide, and I think those should, of course, be investigated further, and that others were accidents or non-suspicious deaths. Now, I think it was mostly luck and coincidence that played into the discovery of these bodies in such quick succession, and with the idea of a possible serial killer on the prowl, that then ignited the news, and it became a big story. So whenever another body came up, it automatically got lumped together with this idea of a possible serial killer without any further investigative work being done. Now, for all of these killings to be connected, it is an extreme long shot. And we know for a fact some aren't connected, like the killing of Suzanne Wormser. Now, when we talk about the series of bodies being discovered in New Hampshire and Massachusetts through 2016 to 2021, this could be something very similar to this, like I just discussed. And again, I am hard-pressed to think that either one of these cases, the stretch of deaths from 2016 to 2021 and the stretch of deaths happening now in 2025, I'm hard-pressed to think that these are the result of some serial killer. However, it is impossible to know for certain. But again, like I mentioned, the idea that the media is kind of stirring up this frenzy is not helping the police who are actually trying to investigate. And I know I just went on a whole tangent about the New Hampshire State Police. But you have police, you have investigators who are trying to actually work on these cases, and then you have Facebook groups kind of sending them on wild goose chases, like the person who posted that mysterious haiku, sending police to Scarborough Beach in Narragansett, Rhode Island. You have the internet drumming up all of these fake leads about possible serial killers. And of course, the police don't think much of them, but of course they still need to be investigated. And it is wasting precious man hours going and investigating false leads created by people on the internet as some type of, sick joke. It's honestly kind of ridiculous. And the media has taken it and they have kind of fed into it in a little bit of way. And then you have these Facebook groups that are also feeding into it. And it's just a flat out mess. There's no other word to describe it. But if you look at it, and you look at it from a speculative standpoint, there is no evidence connecting any of these cases together. And of course, it's always, I guess, it's not really fun, but it's always the flashy thing to think of that there's a serial killer, because our brains have been exposed to this idea. You see Netflix documentaries about true crime, about serial killers, about all these things, when in reality, serial killers are not making up this whole plethora of murders. Not all murders are responsible from serial killers. That's just kind of the flashy answer I think a lot of people try to go to. And of course, this is my own personal opinion. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that there's a serial killer at work. There's nothing consistent here. All of the evidence connecting these together is merely... there isn't any evidence connecting them together. It is merely just people trying to make coincidences or patterns when there's not really any patterns to begin with. Nothing is consistent. There's no evidence. There's nothing here. However, I think it's important, and I hope that all of these cases are investigated properly and they are figured out whether they were accidental deaths or whether they're homicides. Hopefully people are brought to justice for these. I hope nothing but the absolute positive for these victims and their families, and to find out what happened to them, and for their families to finally get closure. That is what everybody deserves at the end of the day, and I do hope that that happens. However, that is all my personal opinions, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode on the 2025 New England serial killer. I wanted to dive back into the realm of something that was going on currently, and when I saw this, of course, it popped right in my head, and I wanted to kind of dive into every nook and cranny to figure out what was going on here, and if there truly was a serial killer. Of course, you got my own opinion there on that I don't think that there's a serial killer, but feel free to let me know in the comment section whether or not you believe that there's a serial killer, whether you think it is the result of something else. If you have a different theory, feel free to let me know in the comment section. I'm usually super good about getting back to people in my comment section, so feel free to let me know there. But with that being said, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Unblurring the Unknown. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all on the next one.